We are not afraid to stand firm on what we believe and demand better for our community.
If we're trying to change the narrative, if we're trying to reclaim our narrative, challenge everything.
But just because history is silent, it doesn't mean that it did not take place. We can't just choose to learn what we want to know and not what we should know.
If we don't know our history, how do we know? Some educators say systemic racism has deliberately left out the history of Black, brown, Asian, and indigenous communities. A system that is formulated to where you only learn what they deem important. But our stories need to be told. Contributions made to society by people of color need to be recognized and honored. Now, since the start of our series more than a year ago, the constant thing that we have heard is that we need to hear our story. We need to hear our history and the struggles, the joys. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Marcus Washington, and tonight is our 15th episode of our ongoing series, Race in America, The Conversation.
And I'm Jessica Aguirre. How much do we really know about our history, our shared history, our individual cultural history? It's a critical question right now, since understanding the past may actually be the key to changing our collective future. Today is Juneteenth, a day that honors Black resilience and Black freedom. Now, whether it's Juneteenth or the Tulsa Massacre, the truth is many of us are just learning about these particular historical events and so many other. So tonight, a lesson in how history reverberates today. More than 2 years after Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, 3 months after the Civil War's end, slavery was still thriving in Texas. But on June 19, 1865, federal troops arrived in Galveston, Texas, informing 250,000 slaves that the war was over and that they were free. What became known as Jubilee Day has turned into the annual celebration of Juneteenth. In recent years, it's become a day to not only celebrate the end of slavery, but to bring attention to the racial injustice still lingering in this country.
I like that in the Black communities, we've kept this tradition for years.
Cities lit up bridges, government buildings. Workers in the Port of Oakland walked off the job. People marched, calling for change to also take steps forward.
Justice is all we want.
That passes unanimously.
Last fall, Santa Clara became the first California county to declare Juneteenth an official holiday, and Congress just made it a national holiday.
What we're trying to convey is that Juneteenth is a unifier.
As the movement forward looks back, California has become the first state to study slavery reparations for African Americans.
It did the harm.
In another first, President Joe Biden became the first president. California has become the first state to study slavery reparations for African Americans.
It did the harm.
In another first, President Joe Biden became the first president to travel to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to commemorate the 1921 Tulsa race riot, where a white mob attacked and killed dozens of African American residents.
This was not a riot. This was a massacre.
107-year-old survivor Viola Fletcher called on Congress and the nation.
Riot. This was a massacre.
107-year-old survivor Viola Fletcher called on Congress and the nation to recognize the event.
Our country may forget this history, but I cannot.
Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation called for an end to slavery and, in a sense, racial inequity. But nearly 160 years later, the battle for equality still rages on the battlefield of this nation.
Now, one of the main ways to move forward towards equality is to invest in the community. That's the mission of San Francisco Black Wall Street. Now, I met two of the nonprofit co-founders, Bavette Brackett and Tanish Hollins. This is at Trademark and Copyright. This is a Black-owned restaurant in the city's South of Market area. SF Black Wall Street was founded last year by 7 Black San Francisco natives right around Juneteenth. And they told me when it comes to when they actually came together, it was so important to honor Black joy and Black history.
And we didn't start with the intention to create an organization. We were responding to the trauma. There was George Floyd, There was isolation to the pandemic. Due to the pandemic, there was a lot of violence. Breonna Taylor,
Ahmaud Arbery.
And that's just emotionally, that is a lot to take on. Even if you don't see it or talk about it every day, it's a part of your life, and it's a lot to take on. But to have a space where you could talk to people, where you could vent, or just see people who look like you, which creates sometimes joy.
Oh yeah. And that was the beauty of Juneteenth last year. Like, we created a space for joy, an authentic space for us to see each other. What can we do through our relationships, through our experience, through our work to start addressing that? And what can we do to show up for our people? That's literally how our organization formed.
I lived in Tulsa for a moment, and I know the history of Black Wall Street and what it means. So talk to me about the reason you all chose that as the name of the group.
So our co-founder, Tiffany Carter, was inspired after watching the Madam C.J. Walker Netflix series to learn a little bit more about Black millionaires. And she ordered a book on Amazon and turned the cover, and as she's reading, it mentioned San Francisco. And she was blown away that there were Black millionaires from San Francisco, and learned this history about Black wealth here that a lot of us never knew. William Leedsdorf, who was one of the founders of San Francisco, was a Black man. First hotel, first school, first business on the San Francisco waterfront, a Black man. And so when we formed this organization, we thought it was really important to honor that legacy of Black wealth.
I was looking at this study, and it said the dollar within the Asian community circulates 28 days, within the Jewish community 19 days, within the white community 17 days, within the Black community just 6 hours.
Well, I think that's also been by design. You know, if you look at even San Francisco, when San Francisco really had Black wealth, we actually had thriving Black communities, thriving Black business communities specifically. In the Fillmore and in the Bayview, Fillmore was pretty much leveled by the redevelopment agency and by national HUD policies that pretty much tore down 883 Black businesses in a span of less than a decade.
What do you hope that people, when they see you all, when they come to events, when they talk to you, what do you hope they learn?
We have 3 tenets for our organization, and that's homeownership, economic development, and cultural space. So we want to be able to use policy to make sure that our Black folks get an opportunity to return to San Francisco, to stay in San Francisco, to live, work, play in San Francisco. And
I look at here, right here, this is who you all are really fighting for, the next generation, because that's so important to see, you know, young Black kids understand the power that they have within their own community.
And I think that's why it's really important for us to be in different spaces and give ourselves permission to stand up and speak up when necessary. I think one of the things that we do great as an organization, we allow everyone to show up as their authentic self. And what that means in the African American diaspora is that we run the gamut. You know, there's going to be the bougie, there's going to be the hood, and it's just like, it's okay. You know, we all are family, and we all are here for shared prosperity.
But what do you all need to be able to truly function the way you want?
I think we need real buy-in. I mean, let's just be honest. We all are here for shared prosperity.
But what do you all need to be able to truly function the way you want?
I think we need real buy-in. I mean, let's just be honest. One of the issues, as I said before, was investment.
When you look at the disparity in income for a Black household versus the average median income, if the average median income here is $120,000 and Black households have less than $30,000, the majority of Black households in San Francisco have less than $30,000. We're behind the economic curveball.
History has shown that Black communities can thrive throughout so many things if you don't tear it down, i.e. Black Wall Street.
Exactly.
You know, the history there of, you know, a thriving community but torn down by terrorists within their own community. White men coming in, burning down the community, and no one doing anything about it.
Well, in San Francisco, it was the government. But it wasn't someone burning down your home. It's someone coming with a pink slip and saying, we are eminent domaining your home and bulldozing your home.
I'm dealing with systemic terrorism all the time. The bootstrap theory, this is real. And it's one of the reasons why I do policy work, and Bavette and all of us have had to expand the way that we do our work, is because when you understand that there actually have been policies written to create the conditions that we're in, then systemic terrorism is not hard for you to understand. Like, people really do experience this.
For people who may not know, Juneteenth, it came after the Emancipation Proclamation, when the slaves, those who were enslaved in Texas, weren't told about it. So they were still enslaved until years later.
Yeah, and many of those Texans came to California, to San Francisco. And
I did see that inside the migration, yeah.
Yes, the migration happened directly here. And it was a way, because San Francisco was still kind of open during the gold rush.
From Texas and Louisiana a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Juneteenth is a huge celebration within the black community. I think more people are starting to understand, like, oh, I never knew about that. But San Francisco holds a big space for Juneteenth, one of the largest in the country celebrations.
Yeah, so San Francisco has one of the longest and oldest, it is the longest and oldest Juneteenth outside of Texas. Juneteenth was something that we can claim was ours, and you just saw the whole Fillmore Street with just black people from everywhere.
And we hope that it continues to grow. We hope that by next year we have a Juneteenth week, Juneteenth month, like all during the month of June, we have black celebrations and events.
Yeah, great conversation with Bavette and Tanish. So look, Juneteenth celebrations continue tomorrow in the city. SF Black Wall Street also hosting Unity of Black San Francisco. This is at Gilman Park in the city's Bayview district. There will be family-friendly activities. We're talking about live music, food, park rides, a lot of fun. It is from 11 a.m. until 5 p.m. at Gilman Park in San Francisco. Now, as we honor Juneteenth and its history, we also wanted to bring attention to the history of black massacres. Now, it wasn't just in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I want you to take a look at this map here. You can see the massacres targeting black communities go back, just into the late 1800s, post-slavery. Now, I've posted this on my Facebook page with some educational links if you want to learn more.
Really fascinating interview, Marcus. Well, up next, a pivotal moment in our Latino history, and it happened at San Jose State University. A chat with activist Tony Quintero about his role in the 1968 Chicano commencement walkout and the legacy of that movement. In May, San Jose State held its 51st annual Chicano commencement ceremony virtually. 210 students participated in the event, the largest class ever. In total, nearly 2,000 Latino students will graduate from San Jose State this spring-summer. This commencement is possible because more than 50 years ago, in June of 1968, a small group of students staged the first ever commencement walkout, protesting the school's lack of Latino representation. I talked to Tony Quintero, one of the organizers of that 1968 walkout.
What happened is the walkout led to the formation of the first Mexican-American graduate studies program in the United States. And it was founded at San Jose State and still continues, of only 5 remaining Mexican-American studies programs in the country. It's very critical that people understand the impact that student activists had back in the 60s. 50 years later, the 26% of San Jose State is now Latino. At that time, it was virtually none.
So the significance of the specific commencement, of having a commencement that's just for Chicanos.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. And that led to what's called Chicano commencement today. And after that, we had a commencement every year where the Chicanos would get together and their families, and we'd have a real great graduation party at a separate Chicano commencement. That all stems from that 68 walkout.
Yeah, I'm the first in my family to go to college. And so, my parents working class, and they had to sacrifice a lot for me to be able to go to college. And it is such a proven formula for the Latino community, and really for any minority, that once you get that first student in college, it changes the trajectory of the entire family.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Well, my brother and I were the only two or kids in our neighborhood that went to law school. We both went to Berkeley at the same time. That was really unique. But it was one where all my friends went, or people that I knew in my high school all ended up graduating to state prison. That's the kind of neighborhood we came from. But somehow we had the enthusiasm and the determination to fight through it.
Tony, I want to talk to you about the importance of history, and the significance of, people of color. And in this case, we're talking specifically about Latinos, really understanding the history of social justice movement in this country.
Cesar Chavez came to our campus and supported us conducting a strike because at this time it was becoming so evident there were no Latinos on campus. Actually, out of 20,000, we counted a survey of 52 Spanish surnames, which, is less than 1%. And we also realized that 20,000, we counted a survey of 52 Spanish surnames, which, is less than 1%. And we also realized the disparity in the opportunity led to this educational opportunity program. I happened to be one of the first Latinos ever to get on student council that year. It was dramatic what was happening and how we were disadvantaged, suffering through discrimination and prejudice. The university was an institutionalized form of it, and it was the oldest university in the state of California. So we focused on San Jose State and focused on the commencement ceremonies.
What is the significance of still
in the state of California? So we focused on San Jose State and focused on the commencement ceremonies.
What is the significance of still holding on to that commencement when we have seen the numbers improve? So, I don't think it's dramatic. 26% 50 years later is better, but I don't think that's phenomenal numbers. Do you?
Well, no, but I think that now that Latinos have surpassed any other ethnic group, including Anglos or whites, as the highest graduating ethnic group in the country, or in the state, the state of California, we've made a big impact. And 26% is more comparable to the population in San Jose. The fact that it came out as a peaceful demonstration was what made it possible for the university to implement these major changes that increased opportunities for Latinos and giving us more equal footing to get into school.
The past may be the key to the future. Tony, thank you very much for being with us. We appreciate your insight.
Great. Thank you.
And here's the thing about history. We keep talking about knowing our history. You don't know when you are making history when you're doing it. When they walked out in 1968, they had no idea that they were creating history by the choices and the actions that they made. History is a moving target. It happens every single moment, right?
It really does.
So we're all capable in the right moment, in the right circumstances, to make a decision to stand for something that could end up in the long run being a historical moment that other generations look back to and say, like those students that are in San Jose State now, they may not know Tony Quintero's name, but they know that commencement ceremony, and he's the reason they are there. So I think it's just like such a broad thing to think about, that we're all capable of making that difference.
Because you don't really know. I think when people make the biggest impact, it's not because they're trying to necessarily become part of history, but what they're trying to do is make things better for the next generation, and that is carried on from generation to generation, and we see the benefits of that protest today. As he was saying, more than 58% of the campus now is Latino. So
26, yeah.
26%. So, when you see that and you see why that needed to be done, it's just a beautiful thing.
It's being in the present and making the choice that's right for the present, and not really people don't go out thinking they're going to make history.
No, they don't.
Just make an important choice in the present.
Yeah, it's being aware.
Yeah, really fascinating.
Absolutely. Well, we've got much more for you. Up next, racism in education. So I chat with a diversity and inclusion consultant, Dr. Sean Fletcher, and he says that we need to challenge the very system that's educating us. The more education we have, the more doors of opportunity open. Well, systematic racism, a lot of people say, that very system may impact how teachers educate and what students learn. So much history, Black, brown, Asian, left out of our textbooks. And some would say it's deliberate. Dr. Sean Fletcher is a diversity and inclusion training consultant. He's also an assistant professor at San Jose State University. Dr. Fletcher says that we all need to challenge the institutions that are teaching us.
Well, I think that's where it starts. It's questioning everything. I learned early on, taught by my parents, to believe very little of what you see and challenge everything. we should challenge the very institution and system that has been educating us. I went most of my life thinking that Christopher Columbus was a hero. I went most of my life believing that the only heroes that I had within the African American community were Harriet Tubman, Martin Luther King, and perhaps it was limited to George Washington Carver. And it sounds cliche-ish, but peel back this onion, if you will, to see some of the darkness and oppressive institutions within education that has precluded us from fully understanding our history, especially disenfranchised and marginalized communities.
I think that rolls into sometimes when you hear the phrase, he's woke, she's woke. And what does that mean? Because I think for most of us, we're just trying to make it. And we're trying to make it in a system that has been created. And what does woke signify for you?
Well, woke has been so diluted. It has been so co-opted. I don't even use the term anymore, just to be honest with you. I don't like the lightning rod that it has become. In the purest sense of being woke, it's enlightened. It takes me back to the Harlem Renaissance.
I think for so long, people looked down on HBCUs, but now we're seeing
being woke, it's enlightened. It takes me back to the Harlem Renaissance.
I think for so long, people looked down on HBCUs, but now we're seeing in a space where we're in right now, where more people are wanting to know more about their history, more about their culture, and love themselves more. We're seeing more people apply to those HBCUs. What do you think about that?
Well, I will say this. I received and I wear it as a badge of honor. I received my graduate degree from Howard University. The real HU. Don't get me in trouble. The real HU is, and at no point in my life did I feel and have I felt since such a sense of authenticity. There is no greater pride that I have than telling people in my life did I feel and have I felt since such a sense of authenticity. There is no greater pride that I have than telling people that I went to Howard University. And when they ask me, do you mean Harvard? No. I pause and say Howard, and I spell it out for them if I have to, because that's another way that we use microaggressions oftentimes to other and lesser than some of our HBCUs that are out there, and understanding that Howard is one of the more pronounced and well-known household HBCUs.
Let's talk about critical race theory, because I know there are a lot of states and even governors who are really pushing to keep that discussion out of the classroom.
It absolutely is. And critical race theory, it was a lens, and it still is a lens through which we are able to somewhat pull back the veil and have an unfiltered look at what America, quite honestly, has spent a lot of time and effort trying to avoid and ignore, which is the original sin of racism and discrimination and predatory practices. When these systems go unchallenged, those who are oppressed oftentimes become what's called co-conspirators of their own oppression. You don't challenge the very systems and institutions that are oppressing you.
What advice would you give to people who they notice the corruption, they notice the segregation within the system that they live? How do you challenge them to challenge the system?
Find your aha moment, because while we're socialized a certain way, there's also something called a cycle of liberation as well. How we start to take the blinders off and take a step back, and we start to look at the systems around us and how we potentially are operating within them to our own peril and detriment, to where then we start to realize that perhaps there's something bigger than us. Find your motivational factor. If it's not you, let it be a loved one around you. Let it be the uncertainty of the future and what we want for those coming behind us. We do owe a debt to those who came before us, who allowed us to stand on their shoulders. And I believe those of us who call ourselves safeguarding the future, at some point, we're going to have to kneel down and let the future generations stand on our shoulders as well.
Dr. Fletcher, thank you.
Of course. I appreciate you having me.
So enlightened there. And you know what? And that's the thing. You challenge the system that has told you this is how things are. And I think sometimes you get that pushback because if you turn the spotlight on, we've created the system that benefits us, then they realize, uh-oh, look what we've done.
Yeah, but I also really liked what he said about, and it was really an aha for me, like that you become a co-conspirator because you've done it that way and that's the way you've been trained.
That's what we know.
It's almost like I liken it to a trauma bond, that you just continue to act a certain way, with your captor, and, that's what it is, because that's all you know, and it keeps you bonded together, and it isn't until you realize what's really happening that you're like, oh, I'm a part of this.
We have to challenge the system and keep our ears open.
Yeah.
For the next. All right. Well, thank you for joining us again. We'll keep the conversation going. Hope you do as well.
Bye-bye.